what's up, everyone? Sam Shah here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today we got Michael on with us. Michael just finished going through his summer 2022 recruiting process, and happy to say we were able to get to a very good outcome, in my opinion. We'll hear from Michael, but so I want to get him to come on here and just talk about his entire journey and how he got to where he is today, and coming from a non-target school, like hopefully shed some insight for a lot of our listeners out there on that maybe you guys can apply to your own process as well. So Michael, thank you for taking time to talk to us today. I know you're a busy guy, but if you don't mind, maybe just kick things off for us by just introducing yourself a little bit, give people a sense of kind of who you are, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. Yeah, so I grew up, in I guess a normal suburb town on Long Island, New York, until I moved to Philly to attend Drexel University, which is obviously a non-target. For me, I always knew I wanted to major in finance. I think it really stemmed from my grandmother when she was young. She was, or I guess as I was growing up, she was just always an investor. And when I go to her house, she always had CNBC on. And then I think for me, it sparked an interest. And even when I was in high school, I would tell everyone I want to work at a hedge fund. I'm going to own a hedge fund one day, right? And it never really clicked to me that there was this process to getting to where you want to get to. And so when I came to Drexel, I went to this one. We have a Drexel Finance Investment Group, and I went to this group, and there were two people talking about investment banking, and they really honed in on how difficult it was to get into from a non-target, but not impossible, and what an exit option was. And so for me, if I never went there, I would have just thought I was going to graduate college and go to the buy side, or for me, I only thought hedge fund was it, right? But buy side is so much more. And so, as I said, I knew I was going to major in finance. And so my first internship was at Goldman Sachs in their wealth management division in the Los Angeles office. And I really enjoyed being there, and learning a lot. But, in the back of my head, I always knew that I wanted to go into banking. And so, or even when I was watching the news, right, they weren't talking about what's happening in wealth management or what I was doing, but they were talking about, Goldman, but their investment banking division, M&A, and it just makes you sit there and ask questions. All I knew, honestly, within where we worked, I was on the top floor of private wealth, and then the second floor was bankers, right? And all I knew is that there was this Chinese wall, and that if I stepped on their floor, immediate suspension. And if they stepped on our floor, immediate suspension. Mm-hmm. And so, since I knew I wanted to go into banking, I said, okay, that was my first internship. It kind of got me that name on the resume, which is what I wanted. And then for my second internship, I actually worked at a startup doing M&A modeling for a private equity-backed veterinarian company. And so PE firm Wide Capital invested $100 million into us. And so where we sit in the market is as really a consolidator. And so basically we're buying mom and pop shops all over the place. And so I felt like it was a really good opportunity because since we're a startup, there's not that much support. And so I was able to do a lot of the modeling, and which I think gave me the recognition from bankers when I was going through the process that, I know or I've had experience in that. And so it really helped through the process. And then now I've landed at Barclays. And so I'm just excited for, next summer to get working.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's amazing. So it's been a long journey, it sounds like. All right, so take us back to kind of maybe the early days at Drexel. At what point, it sounds like you first realized you wanted to do banking when you went to this club event. Was that sophomore year then, freshman year?
That was so it's really interesting, right? Because that was actually freshman year. And, my friend, so that I became very close with, who did the event, so she graduated when I was a freshman, and she worked at UBS. And so she actually went a non-traditional route. And so she worked at a different company. Then she worked at GS, the same job I did when I was a freshman. Then she actually did buy side that we actually had through our system. And then she recruited full-time into banking. And so, and she did no networking at all. And so, I think because of that, there was a lack of like that networking was so important. And so, I didn't know that. And so like here I am working at Goldman Sachs as a freshman, just finishing my freshman year, starting my sophomore year, right on the desk. I think I was 19 or 20. And, I had this whole company in front of me, the database of every employee, right? Like I should have been emailing every single banker in the firm, every senior banker, and getting them on the phone. But I didn't know that that's how the recruiting process went. And so, I didn't know the importance of networking. And I just thought because I'm working at the firm already, it would be like pretty simple to like then go into banking. I knew nothing about the recruiting process. And so, it wasn't until like,
Did you intern with Noah in PWM?
I interned, so he did the same job I did, but a year later.
Oh, okay. Oh, he did a sophomore year.
So he did it I guess his sophomore.
Yeah, because you were a freshman when you did it, right? Got it. No, because
So we're in a 5-year program. So
right.
I'm a sophomore. He probably did it when he was a pre-junior.
Right. Yeah, which is yeah. But for the sake of our listeners who are going to 4-year schools, effectively, it's your freshman year, his sophomore year, in quotes, right?
Yeah.
No, that's interesting about that because like when you said you had the entire employee database and you didn't take advantage of it, and that immediately reminded me of our other client Noah, because I remember when he was doing that internship, he was already in the program and he was like hitting up all the bankers, and he kept one of the questions he kept asking was like, how do I do this tactfully without like pissing off my PWM people? Because obviously like he didn't want to stay in PWM and he wanted to go to IB.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely like a worry there, right? Like I had steady workload the whole time I was there, right? But constantly people ask you like, what do you want to do, right? And you don't want to say, oh, I want to be a banker, right? Because then they lose interest in you. And so it's really about playing your cards the right way. I wish I knew what I knew now about the recruiting process, or even a year later, what I knew about the recruiting process, right? Like I didn't know anything about the recruiting process really until I joined Wall Street Mastermind, because, when you come from a non-target, I think it's really important to like note that there really isn't role models like to look at, right? There's not like, there's not like, 10 seniors a year going into banking, right? When I was going through it, nobody was, right? Like it was like maybe one a year, right? But you don't even know about them. Then, the people that are within the industry already, right? They're busy. Like I wasn't going to call my friend up and ask her like the dumbest question in the world, because like she's working 24/7 and doesn't have time. And so like, I just wish I did it earlier, right? And I think everybody says that. And so
every person says that always. Like, but I guess because you joined Wall Street Mastermind like end of January of your pre-junior, which is like your sophomore year, effectively, right? So between like your freshman year when you went to this club event up till like end of January sophomore year when you like joined Wall Street Mastermind, like what were you doing during that time as far as recruiting prep goes? And were you doing anything, or were you just doing nothing, or like?
So when I was at Goldman, they had like free like Wall Street Mastermind stuff, and I mean not Wall Street. I'm sorry, I'm literally don't even know what I'm talking about. Wall Street Prep, and so we had that through Drexel also, and so I was really just like trying to study that stuff as much as possible. But again, like that really just goes into modeling, right? It doesn't go into like the high level conceptual things of things. And so, I like to say I was doing that all the time, but obviously I was working, 60 plus hours a week. Like I was just trying to get myself better. And then honestly, I wasn't doing too much because I didn't know anything about the recruiting cycle. So I was just like, on I don't want to say high horse, but like I worked at Goldman, right? At like Drexel. See, in my eyes, I always knew I had an end goal, right? But like at Drexel, right, a lot of people's end goal is to work at Goldman for one of their internships. And so I had done that for my first co-op. So a lot of people would be like, oh my God, amazing. Like, you're so amazing for your first co-op. Congrats. And in my head, I'm like, I don't want that congrats. Like, that's not what I want to do. And right. And so for me, it was like other people's point of view of me were like, this kid's amazing because he did this for his first co-op that isn't so often. In my view, I was like, I want to be a banker, right? And I need to make that happen. And so after Goldman, I really didn't know anything about the recruiting cycle. And so I wasn't doing any crazy prep or anything like that. Like I had Breaking Through Wall Street's guides and everything, but I wasn't really reading through any of them or anything because I didn't really know like the recruiting cycles and when I need to be ready by versus when I don't need to be ready by and everything like that. And so it was like a bit of like, when I had my first call with Wall Street Mastermind, like that was when like, I don't even know what possessed me to set up a call. I think I was just like on LinkedIn and I really knew I wanted to go into banking, but my one friend, right, was telling me like things, because she went in a non-traditional way, right? And so, in her point of view, right, you don't need to network and do all these things, right? But like it's different when you're going for an internship than you are full-time, I think, because there's so many people trying to get in here, right? And Penn's right down the block from us. And it's like, you need to set yourself apart and you need to start early, especially when you're from a non-target. And so I think that's what really made me do the initial call. And I feel like for me, it was something I really was like struggling with is right. Like I had nobody to ask. There was nobody like to ask, should I do this? Should I do that? Even like the small things of just like what I think is a dumb question, right? Like is so helpful because like it's something that like I was just struggling with. Like and again, like if I didn't join this program, like I would have probably never did networking ever. And like, I mean that. Like I really had no idea like how like the emphasis on networking and referrals and how all that worked.
Yeah, and it's not your fault. It's just like you have one friend that you knew that you were close to that was in banking, and she happened to have like an outlier experience where she didn't need to do any of that, and so that was like your source of information. And I think that's a really good thing to call out, which is like a lot of times, like you really have to be careful who you're getting your information from, right? And in this case, it's not obvious too because she's in banking. So like I think like I don't know. A lot of people are like, oh, I'll just go get help from like an upperclassman, or I'll just go get help from like a friend or this person or that person. But it's like sometimes you really don't know whether like the information you're being given is. And imagine if you had just done it that way, done it her way, I think you'd be in a completely different place today, right?
I'd be in a terrible
Yeah. But then
terrible
like,
place. And
but then like the person that gave you that advice, like they can't be responsible for that, right? Like they're not responsible for
exactly.
that. So it's
It's
just
not
like,
their fault. I mean, it's just how they went through it. And, and I obviously I can't like fault her for that at all. I mean, she's will always be one of my best friends. And she ended up helping me get an interview, but it's just really interesting when you sit back and think about it, right? If you're not asking the right people, right, like you can get a clouded judgment. And so, I'm really happy that I joined because had I not, right, like I really have no regrets. Like, even my parents, like my mom always asks me like if I regret spending the money, right? Because it's all my money. I worked my whole life. It was me, and I said like, you're not going to understand. It's not something that you're going to understand, right? Like all you're seeing is the price tag, and you're not going to sit and understand like what I'm getting out of it and what it has helped me with. And so it's hard because like my parents didn't go to college, and so like they don't understand some of the things or the decisions that I made and or we're going to make. We can talk a little bit about it, but I was going to defer my graduation to had I not gotten an offer and to recruit again. And so for somebody who maybe knows a lot about recruiting and banking will say, I think you're crazy, but you know what, it might make sense to do that, rather than somebody who doesn't know will look at me with three heads and say you're out of your mind. And so it's really interesting.
And also it depends on who's gonna have to pay if you do, like, is it you or your parents, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I had every intention on paying for it myself, and taking out the loans to pay for those extra 2 quarters to graduate, the next fall, so I'd be qualified for the next recruiting cycle. And so like, I mean, it is what it is, and you have to do what you have to do. So,
but I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up that I kind of want to spend a little bit of time on, because I feel like a lot of
yeah,
students that consider joining our program kind of run into what you just talked about, which is their parents they don't really understand why their kid would want to join a program like this, because usually most of the parents that we come across, they don't know what investment banking really is in the first place, is they didn't work in finance. They don't understand how hard the recruiting process is and how competitive it is, and they also don't really understand like all the benefits of getting into investment banking, like how high the compensation is, or how good the exit opportunities are, or the prestige and the network and all of those. That's essentially like the return on your investment for like going to college, right? Like
exactly.
Drexel is what, like 70-80K a year, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's
Well,
like,
let's be very clear here. I don't pay that. Okay.
yeah, yeah, but like, I mean, because we've worked with like 5 or 6 Drexel students at this point,
It's
so
one
like,
of the most. It's one of the highest, you know,
yeah.
costing colleges in the nation.
So the point being, though, is like you pay all that money to go to college so that you can have the best career possible in the future, hopefully, right? Like that, whatever job
Yeah.
you get is the return on that investment. But I think like a lot of parents don't understand that in terms of like why this is such a great ROI. And so I guess the question I want to ask you, which I think would be helpful for other people, is like, because it sounds like you just went ahead with it anyway. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
it's my money. I'm going to invest it because I believe this is what's right for my career. And ultimately, like you kind of just took ownership of like, hey, whatever happens, like whatever the outcome is with recruiting, like I'm the one that has to live with that. Right. But I feel like a lot of students in your situation, if the parents aren't on board because they don't understand it, they probably would just do what their parents say, because at the end of the day, it's your parents. There's no one you trust more than your parents, right? Like your parents want what's best for you. And even
Yeah.
in this case, I'm not saying they don't want what's best for you. I'm just saying like their intentions are always good, right? And
Yeah.
so like what what was going through, what was your mentality, what was your mindset that like made you say, you know what, I don't care, I'm just gonna do this anyway. Like, because that, I think that is
Yeah. I mean,
unique. That is really
yeah.
unique, actually.
Yeah. I think I was really fortunate to, really like become, I guess, obsessed with money really young. And so, when I was in high school, right, I was like 14 or 15. I got my first job at just an ice shop. Before I graduated high school, I was running 3 ice shops. And like for me, it was like, I want to work, work, work. And so I was able to save, a lot of money for somebody my own age. And then through Drexel system, right, we work co-ops and stuff and internships. And so I was able to save money. And so, I think it really comes down to like, when you're just from like a normal town, right, and everyone just like normal jobs and stuff, like, your parents like see, oh, so and so, like, oh, they just graduated college, they got a job, right? Everyone's normal thing is they graduate college, they get a job, right? But nobody knows like what they're doing or what their job is, right? Everyone knows, just know they just graduated and got a job, right?
Mhm.
They don't always understand like what, when somebody says Wall Street, like what is Wall Street? And so for me, like my mom's cousin graduated from Binghamton, which is a New York State University, right? And he went into like really like he worked at RBC, worked at Lehman Brothers. Now he's a CEO of the company. Like he does very well for himself. And so like my mom would look at with him, right, and what he did and say, well, he just went to Binghamton and did all this. You can do all that just from whatever. But I think Wall Street's changed from back then, and I think it was easier to get in back then, and I think it's harder to get in now. And so for me, it was really a struggle to whether or not I wanted to spend the money or not. But like I had to say for myself, like if like I knew that if I was going through this process and I did not spend the money and I did not get a job, I knew 100% that I was going to regret it. And that's why I think it's really important to not just take, LinkedIn, right? Like schedule a call with you and the team, right? And like really understand what you're getting out of it. And because, like, again, like I think parents always have the best intentions, like you said, right? But they don't know what you know. And so, like I know that the recruiting process is not, you know, my parents still probably never going to understand the recruiting process that I went through, or the job that I'm going to do. Like, it's hard because a lot of times when you go to non-target, all of your friends are not looking for these crazy jobs,
Yeah.
right? And so you find yourself sitting by yourself and having to work hard, and that is a struggle within its own. And so to be able to deal with that, to push back on your parents, like my mom, like I don't think they were happy I sent the money, right? But it's not their money, right? Like if it was my parents' money, like I would have had to like really, really push back on it. And so what I would say to anybody is, right, like if you know what you know, right, and you know how hard the process is getting in this, right, that's something they're never going to understand. And so you can't just, you can't just take like no as an answer, right? You have to say to yourself, like, if this is what I really, really want, I have to do it. And so like it
Yeah.
is a lot of money, right? But think about it when in the long term, right, it's not. And so that's the way I looked at it. And so had I needed like somebody to pay for it, right, I would have fought like hell to do it, just because like I knew I needed that support system, and that's why I'm happy I did it. And so like, I do think that it's a struggle. Like if my mom said no and I didn't have money, right, like uh, uh,
Yeah.
that's hard.
Yeah, that's tough. Is like because you were fortunate enough to have money saved up and you're able to be financially independent and spend your money the way you see fit, which not all college students have that
See,
ability.
even though like my money's my money, like it's in my name, right? Like it's not like my money's in my, some kids have their money in their parents' names and stuff like that. And so they need their permission to even spend their own money. And so, it's just really important to know what you want. And it's hard because you don't always know what you want to do in the future. And so it's really important to know, I think though, if you feel strongly about going into banking, right, then you have to do what you have to do. And you have to, like persuade them or show them like it's not as easy, like what I mean, especially when you're from a non-target, you need
Yeah.
to.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, which is like it comes to, if I had to sum it up in one word, it's like conviction, right? You had enough conviction that this is what you want to do and you were going to figure out a way to do it. We've also had students who want to do the program and then like ask their parents for help. Parents either didn't want to or couldn't, right? We see both, and then they would just still not take no for an answer, and they'll go figure out other ways to get resourceful and come up with the money. Maybe they save up, maybe they, I don't know, we've even had people like take out like a small incremental student loan because they view this as like an extension of their education, right? Like, but whatever, it's just like people who know that it's kind of what you said to, you're like, you knew that if you didn't spend the money and then you didn't get the job, then you were gonna 100% regret it because you're gonna feel like there's more you could have done that you didn't do, right?
Exactly.
Versus now you've gone all in, you left everything out there, and whatever happens, you can live with the results. And
Exactly.
regret is like, I mean, regret is poison. Like regret is horrible, but that's really powerful stuff, man. I think like that's more of a mindset thing. Like we're getting into like the woo woo stuff, but it's like it's not even like about strategies and tactics, but it's just like banking recruiting is hard. Something
Yeah.
like this is just another obstacle that's in front of you. Like you're gonna have to like first try and convince your parents and educate them on the value proposition, and if that works, great. If that doesn't, then like you have to figure something else out, right? So um, but you came into the program though. So we all this time we've been talking about like up until you joined the program, you came into the program. Obviously, you're saying you're glad you did, but like, what did you find to be most helpful for you in the program? Like, because a lot of people from the outside looking in, having not having done the program, the question is always like, well, like, what are we gonna do in the program that I can just do on my own? So it's just like, as someone who's actually gone through it, can you kind of like shed some light on that? It was like, what did you feel like was helpful in the program, and were there things that we did that there's no way you would have done that had you gone through the process alone? Like you can like definitively say, yes, that was like incremental value added for me. Like, was there anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like, I mean, like I said, I knew absolutely nothing about timelines and networking, right? I knew that networking was important. I just knew that, right? But I didn't know how to network. And so, you know, that was a huge struggle with me. And it took me a while to really, I don't want to say master it because I don't think I mastered it, but to get comfortable doing it. And so, like, I even think this is really important to note, right? When I first started it, I had this internal pullback of like, I felt like I wasn't even smart enough to email Goldman bankers, right? Because I just didn't want to embarrass myself, or really any banker, not just Goldman. Like, I knew I wanted to work at a top 10 bank, and like, I was worried that like, okay, if I get on the phone with them, like, I'm going to sound like an idiot, right? And then you just ruin the whole thing. And so it wasn't until I started having a few calls and they just went so well, and like, it's just a conversation, right? And like, my thing is like, even when I was reaching out, right, just having the support system of your team to say, you know, to even just make me feel better, like, is this okay to send? Like, how do you respond to this email, right? Because I've seen, people, you answer the email the wrong way, they won't answer, they don't, they're busy, they won't answer you, right? That to kind of know how to network, right? Like, I started from scratch, right? And then I started networking like insane amount, like all the time. Like, I remember my grandma thought I was crazy because I was working remote. So she's a snowbird. So she goes from New York to Florida. And so I was living there for 3 months, like, March, April, May. And I was like, every night I would finish my 9 to 5 internship, and then I would start networking like crazy. And so, like, she thought I was out of my mind, like going nuts. And so, had I not joined the program, right, I wouldn't have understood that. And so I think that's just one piece. And like, that piece, like, you can like figure out on your own, right? But I think the biggest thing in terms of networking was just knowing the timelines, having some templates to then make my own, but also having the support system to say, like, you think this is like good enough to send? Not that, I just think like, you guys have obviously helped so many people get into banking that what a good networking email looks like, right? Or like the stupid things of like, now I don't really ask anymore because I feel like I know what to say. But when I first started, I really didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
And I guess like moving on from networking, and I don't know if you want, like, I mean, like, should I talk about like my experience with the behavioral questions, like
Yeah,
through my
yeah.
super
Go
days right
for
now,
it.
or?
I think that is actually, that part is super interesting. The thing you were telling me earlier. So yeah, why don't we go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note. So, like, I think something that you guys do well is, right, like the framework through the behavioral questions, and that there's a certain way to answer a question. And I think, everybody thinks that they, know behaviorals, right? Like I did, and you don't. And so there's a way to answer these questions, and I think you do sound so much more sophisticated when you answer these questions using the framework that you provide, rather than just blurting out BS and thinking that you're doing a good job, when really the person coming next to you that might be from an Ivy League school, like, I think what people don't understand sometimes is that if you go to an Ivy League school, you don't have to be as polished as a non-target kid does. And so, like, you need to make sure your answers are like beyond crazy, because when I was going through my Barclays interview, I guess, let me start from the beginning. So my first super day was at Citibank, I think in like April. It was really, really early. And I went through the process. I had 2 first round interviews that were very technical driven. And I think, the technicals, as we always say, is just a checkbox. And so going through the modules, I think what your modules does is it helps you really understand on a conceptual basis everything, right? If I'm just watching Wall Street Prep, I'm just not learning like the high level stuff that I really want to know. And I mean, you learn a little bit of that if you read Breaking Through Wall Street, but I just don't think it does it as justice. And so, I think having both helped me, but honestly, I didn't even read the Break Into Wall Street stuff. I'm going to be honest. Your framework did me well. And before I go full time, I'll go through all that stuff. But but I think it's important because like the stuff that you went through is is really for an interview, a checkbox. And so just making sure you know it and you understand it, like we always say, conceptual, that any question you get, right, you can think about the answer. And then again, like having the framework or having the team that if you have any question, it's like, I think it's important people understand too, right? If I ask a question, like it's not like I'm getting an answer 2 days later, right? I'm getting an answer sometimes minutes or, the longest a couple hours. And so it's super helpful to just like be able to ask somebody a question and have an answer like that. And so, through that interview, like my city interview, the technicals were great, super easy. I had 2 great calls, got moved on to the super day. I thought the super day was really, really good. And then it was like, I don't know, a week or two. 3 weeks, I didn't hear back. I reached out to HR. Immediately, I get a declined email. And I was like, I was probably like depressed for like 3 weeks because I thought it went so well. And I was like, this is it, so early in the process. I'm not going to have to do anything else. Yeah. Like, I just thought it went really well. And so one of the guys answered my thank you email. I was like, wow, I'm in a really good place. Like, this is going to go well. And then, it didn't work out. Then it took me like probably 3 weeks to jump back in the saddle and start networking like crazy again, which I regret doing. But, I jumped back in and started networking like crazy. Then my next opportunity was, like I said earlier, my friend worked at UBS. And so I knew her. She helped out with some recruiting. So she put me in touch with the people I needed to do. I had great conversations. One thing led to another, first round, then super day. And so when I got to the super day, answered my questions. And now let me preface here, the first 2 interviews, I watched the frameworks for the behaviorals, but I really didn't put much time into Wall Street Mastermind's, package. I just, thought I knew what I was doing and whatever. And so Citibank, I had no feedback. I didn't know why I didn't get it. I was so confused because I thought it went really well. Then the UBS one, because my friend worked there, I had gotten feedback afterward. And so, she said just some of the questions, my why UBS sounded generic. And, I didn't think so because the stuff I talked about was only about UBS, like no other bank did that. And so, but what I think it like in your like your framework, right? Like, I guess, like there's one thing in your framework that I think like sets you apart. And so like when like you talk about name dropping people, like I never did that. And so I felt like that because I didn't name drop somebody, that's why they thought it sounded generic, is because it's not like I said I was talking to people at the firm. And so, I got feedback from right there, and right then and there, I said, okay, things need to change immediately. And that was like towards the end of the process of like recruiting, and not a lot of banks were still recruiting. And so, I had every set intention on deferring my graduation and graduating 6 months later and then recruiting through this whole process again, because I said, you know what? I went through this again. There was no way that I'm not going to get a job if I go through it one more time. I know, like, I made my mistakes and now I need to learn from them and I need to just work harder, because I am a really hard worker. And so, like, I had every intention that taking the financial hardship of taking out student loans to defer my graduation would be worth it 100%. And so then out of nowhere, I got the Barclays interview, and I had spoken to pretty high level people at Barclays. And so I was like, this is it. And this is my last like hurrah. And that was in, I want to say, I actually remember it was the first week of November, because I had to stay in Halloween weekend. I actually had all my friends come to Philly and I sent them all out with my friends from Philly. I said, I can't go out. Like, this is too much on the line right now. I need to study. And so I sacrificed, and that was really hard. I sacrificed the whole weekend, and I really sat and I said, you know what, I need to follow this framework word by word, because once I followed that framework, I knew immediately that I made the wrong decision not doing it in the beginning. Just reading the before of what I thought was good and what maybe even worked when I interviewed at places in the past versus how I sound when I use the framework. And I just think it's really important to note, like, so many people think that they know how to answer behavioral questions, but from a non-target, it means even more that you answer them the right way. And so, like, even when I was in the Barclays interview and the Super Day, I had two MDs interviewing me. One of them, like, tell me about your greatest weakness, right? Like, he literally was like, and so why, he asked me why Barclays. And so I just, in my head, I cut down the why Barclays answer that I had through the framework. But the way I said it, he literally said to me, he goes, that's exactly what I want to hear when I answer that question, when I ask that question.
Wow.
And right then and there, I knew. And then when he said, like, what's like a, I don't know if it was a problem or a weakness, but like they coincide. And so, and how you fixed it, right? And so I answered it with the framework perfectly. And he was like, wow, that's like, very good answer or whatever. And right then and there, I really was just like, screw me for not doing this earlier, And so it was one of those moments that I was like, wow, like I feel like really well after this interview. And so, and I also took a class, right, like that we just like invest the school's endowment. And so I was covering tech. And so I was able to really talk about the markets really well. And so, this interview really wasn't that technical. It was very conceptual, but like I could tell that like when they were asking me about the market, right, they were really going in depth of the market, right? Sorry, my Apple Watch. They weren't just asking me like high level market questions. Like they wanted to make sure I understood the market. And so, it kind of all just worked out so well. And after that interview, I said, wow, like I didn't feel this good coming out of those last two Super Days. And so this interview, like I followed all the framework like crazy. And so even like how to answer like the market questions. And so like, I feel like just using my knowledge, but then framing it that way and like giving I just thought it all went so well. And that was like a light bulb moment that like, shame on me for not doing this earlier on.
Oh man. So first of all, that was, I felt like I was watching.
I mean, I'm being very honest.
No, I know, and that's great. I appreciate that. Like but like that was like I felt like I was watching a movie, and that was dramatic, like just unfolding before my eyes in real time. But long story short, though, it sounds like the things that helped you in the program are one, taught you how to network, which you had no idea how to do. Two, on a technical side, even though you had done some Wall Street prep stuff before, and you had access to breaking the Wall Street, but like the difference between our technical training and kind of the Wall Street prep, breaking the Wall Street stuff is like, we're teaching you more how to pass the technical interview, which does not really involve any financial modeling. Whereas
exactly.
like a Wall Street prep financial modeling course, not saying there's no value, but it's more valuable after you've gotten the offer.
Exactly. So it'll be more value when I'm studying to be a banker, right?
Well,
to get
so
the job,
one of them is teaching you how to get the job, and the other one is teaching you how to do the job, right? And I think a lot of people kind of like conflate those two things. They think that, well, to pass the interview, I just have to know how to do the job. I was like, no, like passing the interview and doing the job is actually two totally different things. Because passing the interview is like you have to be able to like verbally explain these ideas conceptually, which is not what you're doing when you're trying to like follow along in an Excel model or a spreadsheet and see like, oh, this cell is linked to this cell, and like there's just, it's kind of backwards.
No, I think that's a really good point, right? Like when I first went through the technical module, I was like, well, I feel like I'm gonna need to know a little more than this, like how to build out these DCS and stuff, right? And that one interview asked me anything I wouldn't have known, like especially at Bulge brackets, right? Like, which is what I really wanted to work at. They're asking just high level questions, and I think it's really just that it's a check mark in the box. And so somebody I was talking to was like telling me how, like a banker was telling me how, he was sitting next to somebody in training, and somebody from an Ivy League school, and he was from an Ivy League school, but somebody else from an Ivy League school asked him like, what does EBITDA stand for? And so like, it just goes to show like, you really like I mean, if that doesn't show you right there, then it's just high level what they're looking for. And so like, and I like what you said, like you're helping us how to get the job, right? Not how to do the job. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really good differentiator between like the two programs if somebody was like questioning.
Yeah, there's a place for both, but I think like people kind of like do them out of order, right? Um,
Exactly.
and then but then like I think the other even the most important point that you made, which is like the crux of the story, is actually like aside from the technicals, it's kind of like yeah, you got to check that box, but the behaviorals is so much more important, right? Because for your first two interviews for UBS and City, like you crushed those technical interviews, right? Like it wasn't even like that was not enough to get you hired, right? Like you felt like the interviews went well, and then like and by the way, we've heard this type of story so many times where someone thought the interview went well, and then they don't get the offer, and then they're like
Yeah.
completely surprised and don't know like, well, what am I doing wrong? You fortunately had a friend who worked there and could give you that type of feedback because a lot of times these firms won't even give you feedback, right?
Yeah.
Um, but like to your point, like I think it's so hard for people to know what they need to improve on the behavioral side because whatever answers you come up with in the first place, you're probably going to think it's a pretty good answer or else it wouldn't be your answer, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
open ended. And it's just like if you wrote a paper for school for your like English class, you're not going to grade your own paper. I mean, like everyone would get A's if they all had to grade their own papers. Like that's kind of like the same idea, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so like once you used our frameworks though, like I just feel this part is so hard to explain. It's like it's one of those things where you have to go through it to
Yeah.
really understand it, right? Because even just hearing you
Well,
and
I
I
mean,
talk
I mean,
about
look at me. Like I even had all the resources, and I still didn't use it. And it wasn't until I used it that like the light bulb went off. And
it, yeah.
so, like,
But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why these frameworks work so well. It's because we've worked with so many students at this point. We've worked with hundreds of students, and we know we see everyone's answers, right? Because you guys give us your answers, then we help you edit it, and then we also see who ended up with what offers, and then so we can basically just take all the most successful students, and then we can like compare what they said in their answers, and just it's basic pattern recognition. And here's like, oh, here are all the
yeah,
commonalities between the most successful candidates, and then that basically that's like hard data that tells you like these are the things that bankers like to hear, right? Like these are the 3 to 5
yeah,
elements that you have to have in these answers. And so it's a very data driven approach versus for most people when they do the behaviorals, it's not data driven at all. It's just like, oh, let me go with my gut feeling. Like, I think this sounds good. Well,
yeah,
maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, right? But like also you've never been a banker, so you might not know exactly what a banker wants to hear, right?
yeah.
And so it's not like we're smarter than you or we're just like more eloquent than you or whatever. It's just like we just have more experience, we have more data, and we're able to share.
Exactly. And that's what like, you're joining the program for, right? Like, it's funny you say all this because I used to think like, how the hell does he like read these answers so quick and just be able to make these changes? Like, it's almost like you reading, you're like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to recommend that, Michael says or whoever. And so, you have seen so many people get into banking, right? Like, what they want to hear and how my framework, like I could tell you right now, like I actually was reading through something like else, and it was like I was just studying, like, I don't know, going in the deep web or whatever, just like searching everything, right? And it was like or something through my school. It was just like how to answer the why or tell me about yourself question, right? And like following these 4 questions, right? And I was like, let me just see if mine like follows that. I'm just curious. And so like mine answered like all those questions like so easily, and like, and which is important before I had you even look at that answer. And even the one that I said earlier was obviously not as polished as I said in the interview, but like I would have never had that. And right, like when I said that question, right, it told them my past, what I did, and why I'm there today. And so, right, like, and people always think that they're doing that, but they're not doing that. And so I thought I was doing all that, but I wasn't. And so I think that's like small things like that are just so important. And I think for me, just even like overall, like having like that support system, like to me was just extremely valuable. And but then again, you're also having a support. Like made friends like with somebody at Drexel who was going into banking who I met through the program. Right now we like talk all the time, and we're just like, and now we're friends. Like it's just so fun. Like I had no idea that they were even going trying to get into banking or anything. And then like one day I don't know if he messaged me. I was like, "Do you go to Drexel?" And we were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Wow, let's get coffee." Like and you're also joining a group of people who all want the same thing. And I always say this, and it sounds so like cliche, but like, you hang around with garbage, you're going to smell, right? You hang around with successful people, you're going to be successful. And so, like I said before, like it's really hard when all your friends are not going through the same thing, right? Like for me, it was very motivating when like people are getting offers, right? Because they were all over my LinkedIn, like people getting offers. It's like, I need an offer, I need to work harder. And so, you're also joining the wolf pack of people who want to be bankers. And so, you're even putting in any questions, right, in whatever. And like, you can get feedback from anybody in the thing, right? Like you're constantly saying, if somebody's saying anyone interview here, right? Like you're giving out names possibly here, this person did it, this, whatever. And right, like you're getting feedback from anyone. I remember I messaged somebody who's already in the industry, but answers a lot of questions like about his experience, right? And he was like, just tell me this. And he's like, it seems like you need to work on your behavioral questions. And that was another like click for me as well. Like, to do what I need to do. And so like, there's just a lot to offer, but then I think it's also like important, like it's all at your fingertips, right? Like I didn't do the behavioral stuff early on, right? But it wasn't like you were calling me up and saying, where the hell is it, right? Like you have to have your own motivation to do what you're doing. You're spending this money, you need to make sure it's worth it. And so, it's also that like, you're busy, right? Like if I ask a question, you're going to answer it. But if I don't, you're not going to ask me, where's all the questions? You know what I mean? So
you have to be a self-starter. You got to be proactive, and we will always be there to help you when you raise your hand. But if you don't raise your hand, we might not know that something is wrong, right?
exactly.
But also like, I think two things you talked about there that I really want to touch on. One is just like environment matters so much, right? Like there's a different saying that I like that kind of says the same thing. It's like you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? And so
Yeah.
if you're in an environment, if you're at a non-target school and no one around you is trying to be as high achieving as you are, a lot of times that can like pull you down, right? Just because
Yeah.
like you talked about earlier how everyone was like so amazed that you were already working at Goldman and PWM, and it's like putting you on a pedestal. And it's really easy for you to be like, oh yeah, I'm already awesome. Like I don't need to work harder, right? Like you didn't, but you could have, right? And so that's like being in an environment like this where everyone is getting into banking together is like that lights a fire under you, right? And that makes you motivated. And then the second thing is like, I think that you really touched on there is just like, and this is a lesson that you wish you learned earlier, but nonetheless, better late than never, which is like coachability is like super important because like you're not the only person to come in this program and then like maybe you're like, oh, I don't need this part or I don't need that part or like I already know how to do this. I'm just gonna do it my way, right? And not saying that'll never work, but more often than not, though, whatever we're recommending again is based on so many people's cumulative experience, and there's a reason why we're recommending it. And it's not that we're smarter than you; it's just that we have more experience than you, and so it's like you already invested to be in the program, you might as well benefit from it.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I think it's also like really important. Like, you never know when that interview is going to come up. And so for me, I think part of the struggle was, and so like, obviously people aren't going to understand this, but Drex was on the quarter system. And so I was working from March to September. And so it's hard because I was working, right? And then networking right after, right? And then it's like, when do I study all this other stuff? And it's like, you need to plan your time so I don't know, you have to be so organized because like there is enough time in the day, but you don't always realize how often you take a break or you're sitting on your phone or whatever. And so like, that was something I struggled with because I wasn't in classes, I was working. And so, it really showed me like that you just have to make the time happen and like stay up a few extra hours later. And that's something that I have no problem doing. And so, but however, like my job was a little bit demanding. So it made it hard just a little bit.
Yeah.
Not, I mean, I'm not making excuses. But you know, it is what it is. And, you know, and I feel like it is one of those moments though, like if I could have picked any bank anyway that I wanted to work for between like the three, I connected mostly with the people at Barclays. And so like, I feel like it was just worked out anyway. And so
Yeah.
it's not like I regret it, but it's not like I regret it that much because I am where I am right now and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But, you know, you just have to make sure that when you join a program like this, you know, like that you are putting it in the work in, right? Like every friend I have from home, none of them's ever worked an internship. They don't even, I mean, I don't even know what their resumes would even look like, you know, like, you know, they all send me their resume and I'm like, I don't even know what to put on this because like, you know, you're just involved in the bare minimum. Even my friends at college who I love, you know, they're not doing anything to the next, they're not pushing themselves to the next level. And that I think is like just a huge struggle. And so joining, like I said before, just joining a program like this, having that group of people, right? There's a lot of people in this thing like that I see more now because, you know, I wasn't in the program last beginning of the year. I joined like in January. Like people are like wanting to, oh, hey, anyone want to do this case study, right? This, right? Like, you know, that's how you make friends. That's how you meet the people, like things like that. Like I never even knew what a case study was really until it was like too late to do them, you know? So like, you know, small things like that is just like, I think just beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. I think this network aspect is only going to become more and more valuable in the future. Because I would say, like, well, we've only been around for like 3 or 4 years. Like, you're a relatively early adopter. You know, we've had 400 plus people go through the program so far, but like someday we're gonna have a lot more people inside the Wall Street Mastermind family. And a lot of these people are going to be starting their
Yeah,
career.
it's funny because we're gonna be like we're gonna be like the more senior people at some point,
You're
right?
gonna be
To
the
the people
OG.
joining
Yeah,
the program.
yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna be the exactly.
But like this is like a huge professional network that you're now a part of. Like in the future, I envision like people are going to be sharing like job opportunities with each other, lateral opportunities, buy side opportunities, or even like opportunities outside of finance.
Yep.
Like, you know, there's going to be
Yeah, I
so.
mean, even now we see it now in the chat, right? Like people are just putting out if they have stuff at their firm, right? They rather give it to Wall Street Mastermind people because they know that the people in the program, right, are
Are good.
animals, right? Nobody's going to spend that money, right, and then not be a worker. You know, nobody's going to do that, right? By you spending that money, it's like you are saying to yourself, I am going to get it. Okay. And so, like, everybody knows that. I have no doubt that anyone in this program, right, is a hard worker. And so, like, would I rather some, you know, Ivy League kid who, you know, had an open door for him or somebody who like knew that or like, you know, went against the wind? And, you know, I have to say from what I hear mostly, right, a lot of non-target kids tend to be top performers at these firms. You know, my friend was a top performer and they told her that. And then they literally told her, because she helped with recruiting, focus on the Ivy League kids. And she's like, how do you say that to me? Like, you know, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I know. It's unfortunate. I guess last question for you. You've already given a ton of advice, to be honest, but like, is there one piece of advice that you want to share with people that maybe someone else shared with you along the way that maybe helped you tremendously, or just something that you want to pass down to other people? Is there anything like that?
um, yeah, I listen to like a lot of motivational videos, and so something really that is so strongly connected with me is right, like you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards.
Mm,
And so, right, like even when like the future seems black, right, and there's nothing in the future, right, like you can't just give up. And so it's like, you know, a big aha moment for me was like when I got Barclays and I looked at the past and I said, wow, that makes sense now. I like where I am and I'm happy where I am. And this makes sense. And so it's important to always keep that in the back of your head because you can't tell what's going to happen in the future, but you can see in the back that it all makes sense. And so like I started recruiting in January. I didn't get an offer until November. That's a long time. Like that process was not easy and like mentally draining, right? But like once I got that call, right then and there, all of it was worth it.
Yeah.
And so for me, like it was worth it. And like again, like success is not owed to you, right? There are always somebody working harder, right? And those things you need to just keep in the back of your head, because you want to be successful. And like you can never ever get to the point that you say I'm the best, right? Because there's always somebody better. And once you keep that in mind, you're going to work harder and harder and harder. I have every intention now, like my focus is on preparing for this job so I can be the best that I can, so that whatever I decide to do in the future, every opportunity is open for me, right? Yeah. People don't realize this, right? But if you don't work that hard, you're put on bad deals, right? That affects you sometimes. And so like I've gotten to the check mark of getting an offer, right? Yeah. And then the next check mark is working my ass off to get the return offer. And then the next check mark is working so hard that I'm put on the deals that are going to set me up for success. And right. So it never ends, right? You're working hard no matter what. And so like, just remember that, right? Like, and so like, I don't know. I'm excited. Like I am so just like excited to work, like get to where I need to be. And
I think you're right, is that it never stops. There's always another level to this. It's like life's like a video game, you beat the boss, you move to the next level, and then you got to keep leveling up. And if you treat it that way, it's actually kind of fun, right? Not that it never gets hard, but like, sometimes beating a video game is hard, right?
Yeah.
But that's really great advice, man. So cool. I know we've gone on for a long time, so I don't want to take up any more of your time, but look, for those of you who are still listening, honestly, I think Michael's story is like just really inspirational, right? Coming from a non-target, halfway through sophomore year, having no idea what he was doing, to then like turning it around. But not only that, I think the biggest thing is like he learned from his mistakes along the way, and he was like open to the idea that maybe the way that I'm doing things isn't quite right, and there's got to be another way. And like not everyone has that that type of introspective personality, right? And then like people kind of just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. But regardless, like if you're in a similar situation, maybe you come from a non-target school, maybe you feel like you're a really, really hard worker, just like Michael is, but you just need some guidance, and you just want to surround yourself with the right people and the right environment so that you can, win at this level. Then I want to encourage you to just like Michael said, book that first call with us just to like see what it's about. Just like talk to us, ask us questions. We'll give you some advice on recruiting. We'll learn more about what your challenges are, and we'll see if we're a good fit to help. Like we may or may not be, right? But like if we are, happy to help you, also get a phenomenal outcome. We don't take people on as clients unless we feel like we can do that. And if we can't, then at a minimum, we'll just give you some advice on what we think you should do instead, and send you on your way, and we'll still be friends. All right. So with that said, Michael, I want to like thank you again for obviously an amazing offer at Barclays, and can't wait to see what you accomplish this summer and beyond, really. And just thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. And if you need help with anything else, don't be a stranger.
No, I appreciate it. Just hopefully, my story can help somebody else. So
it absolutely will, man. This was a great interview. Really enjoyed it. So love seeing all the success on your end. You deserve it. You work super hard. And yeah, man, let's just stay in touch, which I'm sure we will.
Of course.
Cool, dude. All right, guys, that'll be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future, and we'll talk soon. All right, bye.